All right. Well, welcome to the program, Nola. It's such a pleasure to have you here today. When I heard your story, I was so intrigued. I really wanted to talk to you about your journey and what you describe as your second chapter in your life, because you're also a rabbi, which is quite interesting for somebody who writes romance. So, can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to go into Regency? What attracted you to doing this at this point?
Yeah. I when I started reading Regencies, it was a time in my life when things were difficult, and I was attracted to that particular period because it wasn't like anything I was living through, and because it seemed like an easier time. It wasn't really, but it seemed to me from a modern perspective that there were certain things that life was a little, if you had money,
Yes.
life was more elegant and simpler in certain ways, even though actually for women could really be awful. Women didn't have a lot of choice, but it was also a time when society was changing.
Yes.
And that was very exciting to me to read about, because I grew up in the 60s and 70s and was radicalized as a woman during the late 60s and early 70s, during the real beginning of the women's movement. And so I resonated to these heroines who were fighting against a very repressive society and few choices. And I went through that myself, and in my former career in advertising. And I was one of these women who was chased around a desk. And
oh my goodness.
But in those days, there was no such thing as going to human resources and telling them. And there was always the assumption that if a man was aggressive to you, it was because you asked for it. And so it was tough. The 70s were really tough for a lot of women who were just beginning to come into the workplace. And although there are other terrible things that happened in the Regency to women, that they didn't have that because they were cloistered and at home.
Right. No, of course. I mean, you were in the advertising when the Mad Men type of era, basically.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I was in an area of advertising that was all men. I was usually the only woman. When I go to conventions, I remember one convention in particular where there were 3,000 men and me.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And I was in my early 20s. I was about 23 at the time, and
wow.
And men would come up, and I'd be people that I was supposed to be having some kind of business relationship with, and they'd be introduced to me, and they would kiss my hand, and I would think, what am I going to do?
Oh my goodness.
That doesn't happen so much anymore, but there's still this idea that a lot of men don't exactly know how to deal with women if they don't fall into very specific categories, even today.
Yes.
So, in the Regency, what I began to find in the Regency, and thinking about the Regency type stories, the Regency settings in England, in London, and rural England, I began to think about, well, if you could take today's problems and put it back then, maybe you could help people see what's happening today in a different, they wouldn't feel like you're trying to preach at them.
Right.
And maybe by reading stories where people are struggling with these same issues, it could help people.
Right. I noticed that. Do you carry that from your work as a rabbi to kind of inject advice into these books for women as
Yes.
well.
As a matter of fact, it even goes back further than that. When I was in advertising, for me, it was all about helping people through giving them good information.
Right.
It might be good information about Hidden Valley Ranch salad dressing, which was one of my clients. But it was, I worked on the what they call the non-retail side of the business, working with restaurants and schools and large feeding facilities. And those were people who really needed to know how to feed people better, how to deal with people better just in a food service environment. And so there was kind of a mission orientation to the work that I was doing until I realized that it wasn't enough for me, for my life. I loved it. I loved being in advertising. I was a creative person and in charge of, I had my own agency, and I would go out and find the clients, and I loved socializing and working out their problems. But I finally figured out in my early 30s that I wanted to do something that had more of an impact on the world.
Okay.
And that's when I began to think about doing something else, and I was looking for all different types of things that I might do. One thing I thought would be wonderful would be to go back to school and learn to run a horse breeding facility.
Oh, okay.
And actually, that was another thing about the Regency period, where they were getting around with horses, riding horses and carriages, and anything with horses, compels me. So I thought that was interesting. But I thought, gee, wouldn't it be interesting? There was a program that I knew of on the East Coast. And I thought, well, I could go back, I could learn to do this, and I could breed horses. Hopefully Arabian horses, which is what I was really into at the time. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about it, and I was married, and I had a son from my first marriage, and he was going to have to go to college. And the idea, my father worked for me, and the thought of just turning around to everybody and saying, I've had enough of this. I'm going to go breed horses. I couldn't see that as a scenario that could possibly play out. And then we got the chance to come back to New York. I was in San Francisco at the time. The agency was based in San Francisco, and my husband and I came back to New York. And I was still trying to figure it out, but we joined a synagogue, which was something that I had never really been involved with in any kind of active way. And it began to feel more like something that I could do that would be interesting, that felt like me. And one day I came home to my husband from work, and I said, I'm going to go talk to the rabbi about what it takes to become a rabbi. And he went white. I mean, that they say someone turned white. He turned white.
I would guess something like that would be shocking.
It was, and the thing was that this was in 1982, 83.
Oh, okay.
And they'd only been ordaining women for about 10 years.
Wow.
So it happened, the synagogue that we were attending in New York had one of these rabbis, but there were a handful. There were maybe 6 or 2 handfuls. Not 2 handfuls, but not all the fingers, right? Not that many. There just weren't. They don't. There aren't a lot of rabbis in the mainstream Judaism ordained every year anyway, and the tend to be small, and then you start. What they were doing is they'd taken 1 or 2 women a year. So it 10 years, and it takes 4 or 5 years to get through the program. So that there weren't, by the early 1980s, there just were not a lot of women who had gone through the whole program. And, there were more in the pipeline, but it was not something that most women did. That didn't bother me, because all of my career life, I was always in these industries where there weren't women, because I realized very early on in my career that I would have a better chance of climbing the ladder if I could be seen. And I knew I wouldn't be seen as a woman among all the women wanted to go into retail,
right,
marketing. Right. But there were no women in helping to sell fire engines or asphalt shingles. That's what I was doing, or in food service. And so that's what I did. I purposely chose that as a career path, and it was successful for me. You do, when you're different, you stand out, and so the idea that I could be one rabbi in a group of rabbis and everybody else would be men didn't intimidate me, and it was challenging and interesting. And in fact, all during my career, when I was in congregational settings, I was always the first woman rabbi they'd ever had.
Wow.
Which was
amazing.
It was challenging, because we're talking about how sometimes men and also women don't know exactly how to deal with something that they're not used to. And so they would either say things or do things that were a little weird. And all you could do is smile and say, "Thank you. It's so nice to see you." And yes, I understand, I'm the first woman rabbi you ever had. And, because they would say these funny things that.
Wow. Well, it was very interesting. In one of your interviews, you mentioned that when your Nola, instead of Rabbi Joe, or even when you were doing other jobs as a waitress early on, you kind of developed this kind of persona outside yourself, and how you did your makeup and your hair and your clothing kind of helped to build that persona that you can then take on and take off when you wanted to, right?
That's absolutely right. When I was out of work early in my career, and I was working in restaurants, I had developed this persona of Tilly the waitress. That's what I called her. And I used to wear a lot of makeup now, and in my rabbinate I wore very little makeup. But Tilly wore a lot of makeup, and Tilly had shorter skirts than I would normally wear, and tighter shirts, tighter sweaters than I would, and because that's how you get tips, and when you're 23 years old you can get away with it. So that, and it worked, because for that period of time when I was working in the restaurants as a waitress, I wasn't me. I didn't have to worry about any of the things that were actually going on in my life. And I didn't have to have this thing going on that sometimes people, when they have to do things that they don't feel are really them, or the kind of thing they should do, and it bothers them and makes them unhappy. I was never unhappy, because Tilly was happy. Tilly was perfectly happy to be a waitress in this restaurant it was near the UN, and it was fun, and it was interesting, and I made tips, and it was a totally different job experience and expectation. And then I would come home and I would change into my normal clothes, and I would feel like I had a vacation from my real life.
That's great. And Nola does that too now? Now you do it with Nola.
Does it a little bit differently for other reasons. When I started telling people, meaning my husband and my friend Jim, who is now my creative partner, that I was writing romance novels, the first thing they both said is, "How can you write a romance novel? You're a rabbi." this was about, Neil, my husband. I finished this book that's coming out next month, was the first novel I wrote, and it's quite spicy. And because I thought that's what I had to write, because it seemed to me like that was what I was reading, and that,
right.
And, so I wrote this, and he read it, and he said to me, I don't know how a congregant's going to feel, and how this, and and I didn't see it as a problem. I never think this kind of thing is a problem, but he was concerned, and then Jim, 6 years ago, when I gave this to Jim, and I said, I don't know what to do with this. Tell me if it's worth pursuing. And he loved it, but he said to me, how can you, same thing, how can you be a writer and there are these very sexy scenes, and I don't know, and maybe you have to change your name, and maybe you have to look different. And I said, well, maybe, that could be. And much of the first year when we were working on this novel and trying to figure out what we were going to do, we talked about my not revealing this other part of my life, my side, to only come out as Nola. And by the way, this is what Jim calls my Nola drag.
Oh, this is your Nola. Okay. Says here, red lipstick and the scarf.
And this is a wig. I never wore a wig before, but I thought if I'm going to be on podcasts and do things and run around, I want my hair to always look the same.
Exactly. Yes.
And I want to have a branded look. And
right.
So we got the wig. Jim came with me. It was a whole experience. We went to the park and found the wig, and then we went to Sephora. Sephora, is it?
Yeah, the Sephora stores. Yes.
Sephora, and they design makeups.
Oh, yes, they can do your makeup there. Yes.
Right. So Jim did that, and I learned how to do all these different things, and it was a lot of fun. And but it's helpful. We got the glass. Jim and I ended up separately getting the same glasses. So when we're together, we both have the same glasses on. But he said to me, Nola needs a special kind of glasses, because I usually wear just gold rim because they're light and I don't want to deal with them. But he said, you need glasses that make a statement.
Right.
My feeling about glasses, I've worn glasses almost all my life, is I want people to notice them as little as possible. So to go into a green plastic with the gold and everything, it was a real experience trying to figure out what the look was, who Nola was, how to deal with that, how to transition. And I'm still having some issues. When I introduce myself to people, I don't always know who I should introduce.
Who do you want me to be, right?
Yeah, who am I today? What happened, what finally happened was that our wonderful publicist, Marla White,
yes,
White-handed public relations, she's so wonderful, and she called me one day, and we had talked about the branding and all of this, and she said, I got this great placement for you in Authority magazine. It's about second careers, and just answer all the questions, and then they'll write the article. So the first question is about who was I before I was who I am now.
Right.
And so they wanted to know about my other major career, which was being a rabbi for over 30 years. And suddenly, so I had to out myself. And that we began to, because we did that, and it was a wonderful article. And I talked back and forth about being Nola and being Rabbi Joe David and how that felt and what that was about. but by the time that article came out, we had realized that Rabbi Joe could not stay in the closet, and that actually letting people know who I am was a good thing that could be interested. That was interesting. People were interested. That people who met me as a rabbi, who heard I was writing romance novels, were interested in that. And people who met me as Nola and found out I was a rabbi were interested in that. And so we have, over the last 6-8 months or so that we've been doing all of this, kind of worked that out. And it's still, I think, Nola doesn't have a problem. Jim doesn't have a problem. Neil doesn't have a problem. I'm the only one who wonders who I am sometimes when I wake up.
Oh, well, that's great. I mean, you mentioned Dr. Ruth, and I can't, not see the parallels with Dr. Ruth, because I love Dr. Ruth and all the things that she did and how she helped people with advice and really kind of a direct way that she had. And I'm wondering if you can basically do a very similar thing, but through your novels.
That's exactly what I hope to do, and that's why actually I've decided to raise the spice level a little bit in this series about the Edenmore family, these girls and their whole family. Not a lot, but a little bit, because I want to talk about in that series the things that happen to people as they become adults and deal with sexuality and their feelings about themselves. I think that's very important to write it. And I don't want to write it as a young adult novel, but I think that novel can be read by people who are 14, 15, today, 14, 15, 16,
Yes.
That's, and so I hope that will help people. And all of my characters, especially the women, because I'm especially interested in focusing on women's stories, have something to handle that they have to work out. And the point of the story is that they aren't saved. They work it out. They save themselves. Now, these books are not about the hero on the white horse who comes galloping in and saves her at the end. These are about women dealing with real issues, whatever those issues are, issues about life, and finding a way, possibly with another person, a man, a woman, whatever, to get to a place where they can have a happy ending, because according to the romance writers of America, it is not a romance unless there's a happy ending.
Well, I mean, we all love it. We all love the happy endings. And I think that realness is what attracts younger readers, because there is a kind of a resurgence of Regency and romance with TikTok and all these younger readers going into this field. Obviously, the Bridgerton and the Netflix series, and that brought that out in the open a bit more. So a lot of people are kind of going back into books about these the same topics. But do you think they need those kind of more spicy scenes? Because your first two books are more of a sweet romance where they just kiss at the end, and it's but it's a very cute story. I mean, the midnight it was just really very cute with the animals and the thoughts of the animals. It was adorable, the story. The other one had the villain and all that. So the Almac story had this whole thing going on which was again very interesting. And I love your descriptions, because your books, for somebody that hasn't read Regency before, I really recommend your books as a first step, because you go into so much detail, and you have the food and the clothes, and you even have a glossary. So if you are not familiar with any of these things, your books kind of are really great, slow into kind of like see what this world is about kind of thing. So I think it's wonderful because I don't see that, and I've read thousands of romance novels. I'm a huge fan of romance, so I've read thousands of them. But I haven't seen anybody really go in as depth as you do as far as descriptions of the place and the costumes and the clothing and also food and recipes, which I thought was kind of wonderful because I know my daughter, she loves Bridgerton and all this, and she's in her 20s, but they like to do parties. They like to do tea parties and invite their friends, and then they watch the show or they do these things. But they kind of like the acting it out and actually experiencing it. So I think the food and what's going on in the clothes are really kind of part of the whole experience.
Absolutely. And that was part of what I loved about when I first started reading Regencies. I loved books that had more of that. Were interesting to me. And when I started writing, I thought, well, I'm going to write the books that I would like to read and the stories that I would like to read. And things that we put into our books are things that I wish were in other books. For example, all my books have a cast of characters at the beginning so that you know who they are, what they look like, where they live. Because when you place people in a place, in a time, you know that they have red hair or they have the dark hair or brown eyes. Right. I think that is helpful. And it's hard when you're reading a book to keep all, especially a new book, to keep all of that in your mind. So I think I find that very helpful. I love doing that part of the writing, and I love my food background comes in here. So I love doing the recipes, and I'm a vegan.
So am I, actually. Yes, so am I. I love that, though. I mean, you should have all the recipes that are in the book on the thing and say, make all these recipes, and then when you're reading it, you can actually enjoy the same sandwich that the heroine is eating while you're reading the book. Have a cookbook.
We're working on it. It's
okay. All right.
Because one of the things about becoming, I became a vegan 5 years ago, and one of the things that drove me crazy was that there are some books, especially in mysteries, Nancy Atherton, whose work I love. I don't know if you've read her Antimony, the Antimony Girls in England, about this woman who, this American who inherits a cottage in a small English town that's not exactly haunted, but there's a spiritual presence there of the past owner. And in all of her books, she puts a recipe, usually a baking recipe. But most of them are not vegan.
Right.
You know, it's because it's hard to get on the map.
Yes.
And I thought, well, when I do these recipes, I may not be able to do everything 100% vegan, but I can always have a vegan alternative or a vegan twist, or, you know, so example, when we did the finger sandwiches in Anarchy, there are vegan alternatives, you know, and in the book that's coming out, we have a very healing broth, a soup, a potato soup, that's vegan, you know, and it came about because my physician, who is a lovely woman, but doesn't get the whole vegan thing.
Doctors don't.
She says, well, have some chicken soup. And I say to her, no. So we have a character, and the name of this new book is Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides.
Right. And yes, I've been waiting for it. I've heard all about it.
We're very excited about it. But there's this wonderful recipe, which I've made all these recipes, so I know they work. And it's a lovely potato soup that just is very comforting and warm and easy to make, and it's yellow because it has turmeric in it.
Oh.
So it's based on actually an Egyptian chicken soup recipe, but it doesn't have chicken in it.
Wow.
But it's a very nice. So those are the things that I'm thinking about. Whatever we do, whether it's in the books or on our website, NolaSt.James.com, where we have many more. We have a very long glossary, not only what's in the book, but other things about the Regency and the kind of the Bridgerton lifestyle that you can live now. Which is a very big thing, as you said, the Bridgerton parties, and there are Bridgerton weddings.
Yes.
It's and so we want the people who read our books, who come to our website, to know that they're respected.
Mm-hmm.
That when they engage with all this material, we want them to feel good about themselves. We want them to find things that excite them and that are new. We want them to find things that they knew and feel new. They're for some reason new again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, your website is wonderful. Especially because you have all of that. You have travel. You have places to go and where to buy the clothing and, and the recipes and that. So there's just a lot of things in there to immerse yourself into the world of Regency. And, it's just a wonderful website. I think everybody should, go over there and spend some time, because there's a lot of really great information. And it's fun. It's a lot of fun, I think. So when you are, do you think that the readers, since your books now, you're saying you're adding a little bit more heat, do you think the readers need that? Do you think it's like a necessary part of a romance to have a bit more of that heat level?
So in the Regency world, there's actually a scale. There's a heat scale.
Oh, there's a heat scale. Okay.
From 0 to 5.
Okay.
So 0 falls into the area of, there's something called Christian romance.
Right. Yes, right. I read a few of those as well. Yes.
Right. So those are on the 0.
Right.
Maybe 0.5. Right.
Right.
I wrote Midnight Miracle, and we decided it was going to be a holiday book.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be something that anybody could read and feel comfortable with, and that's why I chose to make it a sweet romance, which is like it could be a 0 to 0.5. There's a kiss at the end. There can be a little bit of sexual interest, but not explicitly so. And I would feel that I think that book can be read by anyone from 13 to 130.
Oh, yes. Yes, very much so. Yes.
And that's what I wanted, because I wanted grandmothers to read this book and give it to their granddaughters.
Right.
And actually this year, because we launched it late in the season last year, we're going to be releasing it with some little minor changes, some things we found. They say there's a meme that said, if you want to find the mistakes in your book, publish it. So
people will point it all out. Yeah, that's for sure.
So we're going to, a couple of things have come up, and we're going to change them. And of course, we have the wonderful Mallory Lewis, Shari Lewis's daughter, who did the audiobook for us.
Oh,
and
that's great.
That's being handled for us by Blackstone Publications, and is wherever audiobooks are sold. And then we have someone had suggested that we do a Spanish version. So we have a Spanish version of Midnight Miracle on Kindle Unlimited. And we're going to, as a matter of fact, release Anarchy It'll be out in a couple of weeks, also in Spanish. We've gotten nice response for that book, and we're going to do a few other little things. We'll see, but that will be out and very much available during the holiday season this year. And so, but Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides, which is considerably longer actually than both those books, because again, I thought I had to write 110,000 words. And it's spicy because I thought I had to write that. What I actually wrote was 150,000 words. And when my creative partner, who's my editor, Jim Gaynor, finally sat down with me, he said, you have to take out 50,000 words. And as we began to rewrite it and tighten it up, and he was right, but he kept asking me questions, and then I would have to write another 5,000 words. So it was an interesting process, but we've got it down to about 100 with the back matter, with about 110,000 words. But I also trimmed the sex scenes.
Okay.
I enhanced what was there because by the time I was working on it this past year, I had learned how to do that better, how to write those better. So I could make them better and more interesting, and I would say Curse is around, depends on your point of view, a 3.5. Okay. My sister-in-law doesn't usually read books like that. As a matter of fact, she was a little upset with Anarchy. There's one page in Anarchy that's really spicy, and she said, I can't believe you wrote that. How could you write that?
At the beginning it was spicy, and I'm fuck it up.
So I told her that I would give her a list of the pages to skip in Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides. So it may be a little too spicy for her, but what I learned in doing this and going through this whole process of writing a sweet romance and writing Anarchy is that the sex has to support the story and push it forward.
Right.
A lot of books that are spicy, every 60, 70 pages, right? You can count, you can know it's coming.
Yes.
No matter what's happening in the story, right? They suddenly find themselves in a barn and it's raining and they're and they take their clothes off. It's that kind of. I don't do that kind of spice. That's not my idea.
Repetitive. It gets so repetitive. I end up skipping those sections really because it's like, okay, this is the same thing again and again. And it's like, okay, I already got that. Yeah, I understand what you mean because I think that the spicy sections of books that I really enjoyed, it was real to the characters and it was represented as real as that character was. So if that character had disabilities or issues or was inexperienced or didn't know or wasn't sure or had other issues, it would be reflected in that. It wasn't like all of a sudden he was Mr. Wonderful in bed, but then he had all these other problems. Just like it doesn't quite match up. So when they actually match and there's a realness to it, then I think they enhance the story because both people are vulnerable at that time and they kind of share that vulnerable moment together. But when it's something other than that, it just feels kind of like just something they threw in there just to make it spicy, but it's really not part of the whole storyline, I guess. The
whole story, right. And that's I think the difference between books that are spicy or very spicy, and because you're writing a spicy book, right, and books like Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides that where the sex is part of the character development of the characters, and also it advances the story.
Right. Is this a gypsies? Do you have the gypsies again from the same the
Yes,
same ones?
from Midnight
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Fascinating characters, actually, that because you can kind of add magic to this because they're so mysterious and that, so they're kind of very good for adding a bit of that magical kind of fantasy aspect of the story.
And it works very nicely into the time period, because there were these groups of Roma who traveled all over and would settle, and sometimes they were in a good situation, sometimes they were not in a good situation, and being Jewish, this trope of people who are homeless,
right,
don't a homeland.
Travel. Yes.
Right. And they have to travel, and sometimes you travel because you want to, and sometimes you travel because you have to.
Right.
Is very much in my heart, and how people manage to live when they're a minority community. In Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides, it deals a lot with people who are trying to understand who they are, who have differences, all different kinds of differences. And the main character is a viscount, the noble, kind of mid-level aristocracy, who can turn into a raven.
Wow.
Right. And the romantasy feature. Romantasy, has this fantasy element, and
right.
becoming a thing now. When I wrote it, as I said, this was the first novel that I wrote. I wrote it, and several people said to me, well, but is it romance if he turns into a raven? And what is that about? And that was about 15 years ago. Now, romantasy is the big thing.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And I wrote this book. The idea came from a dream. I had been thinking about wanting to write a romance novel, and I had a dream about a man who could become a raven. He could become a raven at will and fly around and do all kinds of raven things. And then he was a normal man. He was a viscount, but he was a normal man. And I got up and I found myself thinking, how would that affect his relationships with women? And I thought, oh, that could be interesting. And I got up and I wrote as much of the dream down as I could remember. And the next day I started writing that novel. So but I mean, the difference, and then of course there's the mystery in the book.
Yes.
About the curse of the Ravenscroft Brides, which kind of creates his character as a young man, and he has to solve it in order to be able to become a fully adult man who can love a woman.
Wow. So is this a series? Is this a series of books?
Yes.
So there's multiple books.
It's multiple books. The first two, as it turned out, it was planned as a trilogy. Okay. But the first two books, actually, which I've written, the second one hopefully will be out before the summer. The Revenge of the Evil Earl is the second volume of the Ravenscroft Chronicles. That's what we call it. That's a series name. It's a kind of continuation of the first story.
The first story, okay.
And then there is a third book that goes along with it, that continues with these different characters who are introduced. There's also a third book that I wrote that's kind of we haven't figured out how to exactly position it, because it has even more characters in it, and it has Ravenscroft characters in it. So it's like a crossover. But it's about, but it's not a really romantasy. So, but that will be out. I hope that'll be out this time next year. It's a lovely story about one of the characters in the the book in the series who goes through something very traumatic in the first book. And the third book is about how she deals with it and resolves it.
Okay. Okay. So there's a lot to expect from Nola St. James this year, actually. So when's the cookbook coming?
I wouldn't be surprised if the cookbook wasn't out early next year, because Jim and I, Jim was also in the food business, and he and I together probably have 120 different jobs that we've done in our lives. And but he was an editor at one of the big food magazines, and he was Cuisinart's biggest seller, and he's just amazing. He's also a poet. We're going to be publishing Pin Feather Press, which is the name of our press for these books, is going to be releasing a book that he's writing about Jane Austen. This is Jane Austen's 250th birthday this year.
Oh, okay.
And there are all kinds of Jane Austen things going on all over the world. He wrote a lovely little book called Pride and Prejudice and 61 Haiku. And he did it just for himself. It was a project he wanted to do. And we'd been talking about what else could Pin Feather Press publish, and he's revising it. It's going to have illustrations. It's going to have these haiku. He writes haiku. He does origami. He's just amazing in that way. So he's going to we're going to be publishing that at some point this year.
That's lovely.
To that.
Oh, that's great. I mean, there's so much coming up. I can't wait for I can't wait for all these new stories. I mean, I devoured the two first books. I just sat down and plowed through both of them. Once I sit down with a book, I can't not put it down until I'm done. But yeah, I think both of them were lovely books, and I really enjoyed reading them. I can't wait to see what you do next, and I highly recommend everybody to visit NolaSt.James.com, and also at Nola St. James too on Instagram. I think
and Facebook, right?
And Facebook, yes, and take a look at all of the wonderful things that she has there to offer, all the recipes, the interviews, and a lot of advice as well, which is definitely something we need. And I think younger people reading these books definitely would appreciate some love advice, because we're all lonely these days. A lot of people are feeling loneliness. So I think romance and also advice on romance would be really something welcome for everybody. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here with me too.
It's been so lovely talking to you, and I really appreciate your kindness and your interest.
Thank you very much, and we will wait to see your new books, and we can't wait to read some more. So thank you so much for joining me today.
So much. Thank you so much. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.